Episode number 49 of Making the Case. Why capitalism isn't as good as you think. Let's get it. Hey, welcome back to another episode of Making the Case. I'm your host, Dr. Jacob Isom, educator, author, speaker, entrepreneur, content creator, a little bit of everything. Um, Back at you with another episode. Our next episode is our 50th, man. I'm thinking about doing something special, okay? So you just have to stay tuned and see what I cook up for you. Um, Man, for some reason I have been yawning, and like anytime that I yawn, like tears come to my eyes. Like, man, when I tell you it's been a long weekend, it's one of those short, long weekends type of deal. Anywho, um, before we get into our topic for today, which is um the really I want to say the downfall of um or the downside of capitalism, why capitalism isn't the greatest for us. But before we get into our opening statement, you already know we got two channel norms. One, we attack points and not people. And two, we don't do all the cussing and derogatory stuff. We are professional over here. And we will maintain and keep it that way. All right. So um today's episode, we're gonna talk about the system, right? A lot of people, I guess, would assume that capitalism, although it is tied to our government and is definitely connected to our government, and capitalism is our economic system that really has nothing to do with the laws being created, right? Capitalism is about commerce. Capitalism about consumerism. And it's a system that has been around for a very long time. Some will kind of equate or say whether or not socialism is more of a speed, even though a lot of people look negatively at socialism. But um, nonetheless, capitalism is a system that kind of keeps the wheel spinning. But with that, I believe capitalism have winners and capitalism have losers, right? And I don't believe that in the our capitalistic system and society, we care anything about equality, fairness, right, wrong, anything like that. Well, we just want to keep the system moving. Um, and of course, that is just my opinion, but there's a lot of evidence to show that that is the case. Now, of course, I have three pieces of evidence to kind of show you how capitalism has really failed to meet the mark for most Americans. And unfortunately, we've heard time and time again that the top 10% control most of the wealth, which, based on the numbers, that is true, right? Now, and that is based under our capitalistic society and system, right? Which, of course, Karl Marx and others felt like the workers were getting the short end of the stick, meaning most people that live in our country, really, most people that live in the world are workers, right? So the workers tend to be the one that's always getting the short end of the stick, while the bosses, those in upper management, seem to get paid more while doing less. We all understand that. That is why colleges push training programs, etc. So for today's episode, we're going to look at how capitalism just is not meeting the mark for a lot of people, and kind of the reasons why that is. But first, we're going to start out by making sure that we're all on the same page and defining exactly what capitalism is. Okay, so that nobody's confused. All right. So, without further ado, we're going to get into my first piece of evidence of why capitalism is just not meeting the mark like it should be. Let's get into it. All right. So, for my first piece of evidence to why capitalism is not working out for us the way maybe we thought it was, but to be honest with you, I never thought that a system was created or any system that is created will benefit everybody. Unfortunately, you're going to have someone who's going to get shafted, right? Um, Typically, most business deals or most deals, most situation where two people are getting divorced, splitting, uh, whether people are selling the business and going their separate ways. A lot of times, ev there'll never be a situation. I don't want to say never. There's not many situations where two people equally walk away feeling satisfied and going about their business, getting the same amount of things. So I'm not coming at it from that standpoint, saying that everybody is just going to benefit in the United States of America. But I do think there are things that we could put in place to make sure that people are living comfortably and feeling good about their situation. But so what I want to do is I want to define what capitalism is and how it actually affects you as a person. So I actually have a article from Teen Vogue out of all platforms, which is crazy to me. And it's titled What Capitalism Is and How It Affects People. Okay. So we're going to get on the same page first before moving on to any other evidence about what capitalism is. Okay. Anytime you see an ism, of course, we're talking about systems. Okay. Um, so I just wanted to put that out there. So let's get into it and see what this article is all about. Capitalism is defined as an economic system in which a country's trade, industry, and profits are controlled by private companies instead of by the people whose time and labor powers those companies. The United States and many other nations around the world are capitalist countries, but capitalism is not the only economic system available. This is true. Younger Americans, in particular, are challenging long held assumptions about the way our economy functions. With climate crisis posing a grave threat to our collective future, millions living below the poverty line, the economic and social shocks of the coronavirus pandemic, an unemployment wave still reverberating, and the richest 1% accumulating even more, ever more wealth, Gen Z and millennials say they have grown increasingly disillusioned with capitalism. So they're saying that the younger people are the one, which is good though, because people need to have a voice. So, but it's important to explore what capitalism actually involves and the arguments for and against it, so you can make your own decision about the world you like to live in. Where did capitalism come from? Where did you go? I don't know how it skipped all the way down there. All right. The origins of capitalism are complicated and stretch back to the 16th century when the British system of power largely collapsed after the Black Death, a deadly plague that killed off up to 60% of Europe's entire population. A newly formed class of merchants began to trade with foreign countries, and this newfound demand for exports hurt local economies and began to dictate overall production and pricing of goods. It also led to the spread of colonialism, slavery, and imperialism. So one could say that, I mean, I think that is a good point as far as it starting with trading with foreign countries. That's kind of how even the idea of capitalism got started. And then, of course, the slave trade and um, colonialism definitely has a huge impact for sure. The death of feudalism, a hierarchical system often seen as oppressive that kept poor people bonded to their master's land, which they farmed in exchange for a place to live and military protection, which happened a lot after the Civil War when slavery was no more. Feudalism was kind of in place, which they call it sharecropping here in the United States. Um, Also, rural British peasants with no homes and no work, which eventually funneled them away from the countryside into urban centers. These former farm workers then had to sell their labor in a newly competitive work environment in order to survive, while the state worked in concert with the new capitalists to establish a maximum wage and clamp down on beggars. By the 18th century, England had converted into an industrial nation, and the dawn of the Industrial Revolution saw an explosion of manufacturing overtake the island. It is within those smoky factories and flammable textile mills that our modern idea of capitalism, in opposition to it, began to fully flourish. Scottish economist Adam Smith published his treatise and inquiry into the nature and cause of the wealth of nations, which was regarded as the bedrock upon which modern capitalism stands. Though some of his specific ideas about value and labor differ from those of modern economists, Smith is often called the father of capitalism. Hmm, that is interesting. What does it mean to be a capitalist? Uh, Before I go into this, your John D. Rockefellers, your Vanderbilts, your um, I'm drawing the blank for some more names. They were considered industrialists, but also capitalists. Okay, because they was in it to make as much profit as possible. According to this article, capitalism had been around for a very long time before even the United States of America was ever thought of. So it's not a new system. Individual capitalists are typically wealthy people who have a large amount of capital, money, or other financial assets invested in business, and who benefit from the system of capitalism by making increased profits and thereby adding to their wealth. A capitalist nation is dominated by the free market, which is the economic system in which both price and production are dictated by corporations and private companies in competition with one another, and places a heavy focus on private property, economic growth, freedom of choice, and limited government intervention. Generally, those to the right of the political spectrum tend to be pro-capitalist. Those on the left veer toward anti-capitalism. Okay, so capitalism is a system where free market, meaning they're controlled by private entities with little government interferes, so that anybody can literally participate in the free market. Anybody literally can create their own private business and participate in capitalism, which that in and of itself is not a bad thing. Actually, it's a pretty great thing, right? It's just the execution of it is what I believe that has been poor. And the fact that when you are a businessman, when you are a venture capitalist, when you consider yourself an industrialist or capitalist, a lot of times you seek profits by any means necessary, right? We know that people sell cigarettes and alcohol, and we understand what cigarettes and alcohol do to people, that people will die off them. But people are going to sell it in order to make a profit. No different than pharmaceuticals, right? So that would be the downside of capitalism, right? And the fact that we literally have a minimum wage, we're going to get to that, so I won't touch on that much. So let's get back into it. How does capitalism impact people? The kind of impact that capitalism has on your life depends on whether you're a worker or a boss. Here's the important part. For someone who owns a company and employs other workers, capitalism may make sense. The more profit your company brings in, the more research you have to share with your workers, which theoretically improves everyone's standard of living. Theoretically, right? It's all based on the principle of supply and demand. And in capitalism, consumption is king. Absolutely. The problem is that many capitalist bosses aren't great at sharing their wealth, which is why one of the major critiques of capitalism that is a huge driver of inequality, both social and economic. And I would concur. And this is a huge problem with capitalism. For a boss, his goal is to make as much wealth as possible while giving as little as possible to the people who work to generate that. All right. And that is the issue, because I often say either you're a worker or you're a boss. And we know there are going to be way more workers than they are bosses. And we also know that a lot of people are going to be okay with being a worker. It's just the nature of it. Okay. Capitalism takes the position that greed is good, which its supporters say is a positive thing. Greed drives profit, and profit drives innovation and product development, which means there are more choices available for those who can afford them. Its opponents say that capitalism is by nature exploitative and leads to a brutally divided society that tramples the working class in favor of fattening the richest wallets. The Occupy Wall Street movement, for example, began as an anti-capitalist protest against the 1%, the richest of the rich of the capitalist class, and asked why they're allowed to grow fat and happy while 20% of all American children live in poverty. And this is true. And to me, this is the downside of capitalism, right? The fact that we understand that with capitalism, there are going to be an impoverished class, right? With capitalism, there are going to be hierarchy and classes of people based off of economics, right? So, survival of the fittest, only the strong survive, okay? Which technically we could say that is fits into a meritocracy, but it's a little bit different, right? Because we understand that people will exploit you for their financial gain. That marks what capitalism is, which you would think would go against a lot of people's morals, right? But we understand when it comes to money, morality kind of gets shifted to the side until, you know, it gets brought back with certain issues. All right. Let's see if we want to read anything else. Um, I won't go into that. All right. So no, that's pretty much what I want to read to you. I want to define capitalism to you, and I also want you to see well how it really impacts us, and why certain people, or why my case is that capitalism as a system does much dividing and does much keeping oppressing people and keeping people down as much as it may be a free enterprise. All right. So let's move into my second piece of evidence. And just watch. I won't give it away. All right. So for our second piece of evidence, we're gonna kind of piggyback off of the last piece. We define what capitalism is. We talked about how it impacts us. Now we're gonna get a little bit specific and talk about, well, we understand, we mentioned in the last piece of evidence, you either a boss or you're a worker. So we're gonna talk about in this piece of evidence, well, how does it affect you as a worker? All right. This is where a lot of complaints are coming from as it relates to capitalism. Okay. We understand the business owners are getting paid. They're getting their fair share. Much like when we talk about the collective bargain when it comes to professional sports, after a certain period of time, um, representatives from the player side as well as the owner side coming together to discuss a fair share of the pie, right? Which is what should be happening in especially every major business entity, such as your Walmart, your Targets, your Starbucks, right? Your big chains when it comes to things like that, should be having collective bargaining agreements. But that's neither here nor there. So this article is from a platform called Brookings, which I've never heard of before, but it looked like it kind of specialized in talking about laws and the economy. So, and the title of this is "Capitalism is Failing. People want a job with a decent wage. Why is it so hard?" Okay. So I imagine that this article will have a lot of stats for you, and be talking about working class people. So let's get into it without further ado. Um, Before capitalism, there were what? There was work. Before markets, before even money, there was work. Our remotest ancestor hunting and gathering almost certainly did not see work as a separate, compartmentalized part of life in the way we do today. But we have always had to work to live. Even in the 21st century, we strive through work for means to live, hence the campaign for a living wage, which would be a true statement. As a species, we like to define ourselves through our thoughts and wisdom as Homo sapiens, but we could easily do so through the way we constantly apply effort towards certain goals by our work as Homo laborians. It nonetheless took two revolutions, one agriculture and one industrial, to turn work into its own category. Industrial capitalism sliced and diced human time into clearly demarcated chunks of work and leisure. Work was then bundled and packaged into one of the most important inventions of the modern era, a job. From this point on, the workers' fight was for a job that delivered maximum benefits, especially in terms of wages, in return for minimal costs imposed on the worker, especially in terms of time. For Karl Marx, the whole capitalist system was eluctably rigged against workers. Whatever the short run victories of the trade unions, the capitalists retained the power, the ultimate control over workers' time. And the worker will remain forever alienated from their work. The goal was to assert sovereignty over our time, free of the temporal control of the capitalists, able to hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, rear cattle, and even criticize after dinner. That's an interesting quote. The problem of alienation is far from solved. Only 1 in 3 American workers say they feel engaged with their work, but in terms of material condition of life across the board, sweep of economic history, capitalism has delivered pretty well for most workers. Wages rose, hours fell, life mostly got better. Global poverty halved. As an economic system, socialism fell for grace, and by and large, and in spite of recent rhetoric of the American political left, continues to fall. Now, I noticed that they say, yes, wages roll, hours fell, but still, you have to understand that a lot of people are living to work, right? A lot of people are living paycheck to paycheck. So they have to work those hours. Yes, some people do get sick pay and maternity leave and stuff like that. Which is just was a natural progression to put in because people get sick, people have babies and things of that nature, right? So you have to accommodate for the natural things, occurrences that happen in life. So that's nothing special. So although these things may be seen as a positive, if they're saying, but it's also seen as a necessity in my eyes. Um, there are many variants of capitalism, of course, from the welfare Scandinavia through Anglo-Saxon laissez-faire to Chinese market statism. But the trend seemed pretty clear. Capitalism works, and it works, most importantly, for workers. Uh, I don't agree with that, but I'm sure they're about to take a different turn in this article. But now, over the last decade, the logic of markets and the workings of capitalism have been intensely questioned and challenged, both from the populist right and the socialist left. Young American supporters of the Democratic Party are now more enthusiastic about socialism than capitalism by 6% and 10% margin, respectively. Leading candidates now proudly describe themselves as socialists, unthinkable just a few years ago. Whether they're in fact socialists by any sensible definition of the term is, of course, another matter. Let's see. We're gonna go past that. We're gonna go past that. Let's see. 2 and 5 hourly paid workers aged between 26 and 32 know their schedule less than a week in advance. That's not anything that. Oh, there are two competing explanations for what happens to tear the connective tissue between growth and wages: the productivity story and the power story. Productivity story goes as follows: wages reflect the productivity of the worker. The modern economy rewards skills more than in the past, and lots of people have not upskilled quickly enough. I would agree with that. Under the wonky label skills bias technological change, This view prevailed across most of the political spectrum well into this century. Free markets could deliver fair enough outcomes so long as everyone got the education and training they needed. Lifelong learning became the mantra of all and the cliche answer from politicians and scholars to the deepen the problem of inequality. So yes, there is a push, this which is why they still push college degrees, right? There is a push for education and training in order to increase your wages. And for the most part, that is true. We know we have the numbers and stats to say that if you just have a high school diploma, you're gonna make least versus associates, bachelor's, master's, doctorate, right? And of course, we understand that it's job based too, right? The more physically demanding a job is, you more than likely to make a lot of money, and you don't even have to have a degree. So, um, those are some positives of capitalism, to be honest with you. But still, at the end of the day, the owner of the construction company or any company is going to be raking in most of the profits. All right, and it's not the trickle down effect that one may think that it should be. Okay. Um, let's see if it's anything else that I want to. Uh, oh, there are two problems with this story. First, the necessary investment in education and training were never actually made. Community college, the most common post secondary destination for students from families in about 80% of income distribution, are underfunded, overstretched, and largely ignored by a policy elite. Lifelong learning never made it from the think tank policy briefs and Davos panels to the real lives of people. The second part is the productivity turns out to be the only part of the story. Perhaps not even the most important part. It is certainly wrong to claim that there is no relationship at all between productivity growth and wage growth. But the connection has certainly become less clear over time and hard to square with the trends of wage inequality. Um, the power story is that wages do not reflect the productivity of the worker, but their power. Lower wages are a reflection of growing powerlessness, the result of four intersecting trends. First, unions have become almost mythical creatures, unicorn of the labor market. Just 1 in 20 workers in the U.S. private sector are members of a trade union, down from more than 1 in 4 in the 1950s. Sometime around 1980, U.S. business declared a war on unions and won. So, for those of you that don't know, when unions first came about, they were very instrumental and powerful in changing the way private businesses were run. Okay, so they're saying that unions don't no longer have that power that they once had, which is very true. Second, the wage gap between similarly qualified workers in different companies has widened. One widely cited study finds that one-third of the increase in the earnings gap from 1978 to 2013 occurred within firms, while two-thirds of the rise occurred between firms. It is the market power of one firm versus another that determine wages, rather than the power of a particular employer versus workers. Even if workers can get organized, they cannot force a completely different employer to share more of their surplus with them. Now that would be socialism, which is true. All right. Third, market power has become increasingly concentrated to fewer larger companies, especially in terms of power in the labor market. The dangers of monopoly power in the market economies are well known, and the push for strong antitrust laws has historically united the pro market right and the progressive left. In recent years, the threat of monopoly power, uh, i.e., a dominant single buyer, not least in employment, has risen. Amazon is a poster child of monopoly power, but in many towns, a single hospital might be the biggest employer and the sole employer of nurses, for example. Hard in these circumstances for workers to negotiate better pay and better conditions. So it's look as if when we're talking about capitalism and how it really can hurt people is, we're talking about a power struggle between workers and their bosses. Okay. And how do workers get better pay, better benefits, and how do bosses keep most of their profits without giving up the money and giving away the time to employers that they need them to work. So this is the struggle, as it seems that that is the point that this article is really trying to make. Um, and I think that's all I really want to. Yes, um, that's all I really want to touch on because here in this article is really addressing how um, capitalism is failing people because we see a situation where workers are consistently are trying to fight for better pay and um, better rights, better competitive pay, a living wage, right? And that is a topic of a conversation that's not going anywhere, right? So capitalism is failing us in that regard, right? Because if people mentality and main thing is to generate as much profit as possible, unfortunately, like I said in the last piece of evidence, that's by any means necessary. Why do you think people sell drugs? Why do you think there is a black market, a underground where people are selling things illegally? Not only so they don't have to pay taxes, it's because they're, hey, by any means necessary that we're going to turn this profit. So capitalism spurs in a black market. That's also part of the downside of capitalism. If everything is just driven by more, greed, profit, then these are the negative effects and downside to capitalism, right? And unfortunately, a lot of time, the workers who make up most of the United States are going to get the shafty end of it. All right. So let's go into our last piece of evidence and really discuss, okay, how capitalism really sits on our mind. All right. Let's get it. All right. So to wrap up today's episode, why the downside of capitalism, why capitalism has really hurt us as a system, is to look at how it has in fact affected our mentality. So I have an article from one of my favorite platforms, Psychology Today. And the title of this article is How Capitalism Shapes the Mind. I would say that our thirst for material things, our need to have um, have to pay bills and get money for this, that, and the third. We want to have a social life, so we want to have money to go to certain events and things of that nature. So it really drives us. This capitalistic um, process really drives us to um, work and drives us to get money by any means. I know I keep saying it, but it's such a true statement. So we're going to read this article and let's see what it got to say about how it really affects our mind. Venture into a bustling artery of any capitalist society, and you're likely to find yourself enveloped by its palpable manifestation, shimmering advertisements seducing you with the promise of the latest commodities, financial institution promise safe havens for your wealth, and corporation locked in fierce competition for patronage. It's an undeniable reality that capitalism sculpts our tangible world. However, what about the intangible realms of our thoughts and emotions? A fresh wave of research is gradually uncovering the subtle yet profound ways in which capitalism shapes our cognitive processes, emotional responses, and behavioral patterns. The so-called invisible hand of capitalism operates beyond the confines of profits and market. It also fosters specific ideologies, most notably those of individualism, materialism, and competition, that slowly infiltrate our societal structures, becoming deep-seated elements of our culture fabric. Absolutely. I believe that we're more individualistic than collective. I believe we definitely more materialistic than looking at the beauty of Christmas right around the corner, right? We get to see how materialistic we really are around this time. And we're definitely a competitive bunch. Now, I would say that competitiveness definitely is inside us, but capitalism definitely takes it up another level, another notch when it comes to the competitiveness. Um, Consequently, the influence of capitalism extends far beyond the sphere of economic transaction, permeate our identities and underlying beliefs. Yet, mainstream psychology has largely overlooked capitalism effects. Textbooks tend to portray human thinking as universal to some degree, when in fact it may be guided by the values and practices of the societies, whether capitalists or not, in which people live. One reason for this oversight may be the fact that psychology and capitalism evolved together, making capitalism seem natural when it's actually cultural. Psychologists also tended to avoid analyzing capitalism under pressure to conform to American political agendas, which cast such critiques as radical or unpatriotic. However, a surge of emergent research is illuminating the deep seated influence capitalist societies can exert on our psychology. Studies suggest that mere exposure to money, for example, can increase self centeredness and diminish altruism. Societies that have embraced market economies tend to foster individualism and exacerbate inequality. Social class also influences self perception, which individuals from higher economic classes placing greater emphasis on personal choice and achievement. Moreover, marketing strategies stoke the flame of materialism and have a significant impact on well being. I mean, we see it every day. We're marketed to every day. Radio, social media, think about it. The ads that are being placed everywhere, right? Whether you go to a football game, whether you're just walking down the street, downtown, you're constantly being marketed to. So you either are going to be the seller or the buyer, right? Worker or boss. That's capitalism at its finest. And a lot of times we're always in this mode. If you are an entrepreneur or a business person, you're always looking to make more money. I'm guilty of it, right? But when you're the consumer, when you're the worker, you're working in order to spend that money. And as I said, you get put in this cycle. You're a hamster on a wheel. Every day, it's like Groundhog's Day. Okay. This is, I think, the psychology they're talking about of how capitalism really affects us. Um, Capitalism also interacts with biases and stereotypes related to race, gender, and competition. Discrimination often arises when capitalism prompts individuals to view others as competitors. Gender biases, for example, tend to be more prevalent in society with greater economic inequality. Neoliberal ideologies that commodify race can further perpetuate racism. Even the widespread bias of which individuals perceive themselves as above average can be traced back to capitalist values of individual success and competition. By examining these biases in the context of competitive capitalism, we gain a deeper understanding of their origins. Even I believe that when we talk about the sexual marketplace value when it comes to dating, that's affected by capitalism, right? You got winners, you got losers. The fact that we rate each other, oh, she a 9, she a 10, right? And a lot of times when men get ranked, they're ranked based off what? How much money they make. Capitalists drive even dating. We know it. We understand it. To the point that you have women going online saying that you can't take them to certain restaurants. That's capitalism at its finest. Capitalism, classism. And I think that's what they mean when they say it affects gender. All right. Oh, so what are the implications for the future? I argue that it is imperative that psychology accord serious attention to capitalism as a previously neglected force shaping minds across the globe. The ideas of capitalism do not spontaneously emerge from human nature. They are the products of history, economy, and culture. A critical examination of how capitalist society influenced psychology will enable research to develop more inclusive theories and practice that accommodate diverse global populations. So I thought they made some great points of how we are really affected by capitalism. And I get that for the haves, right? Capitalism is great, right? When you feeding off of other people, right? Um, Capitalism drive the entertainment industry, the food industry, the pharmaceutical industry. It drives the institution of education, religion, etc. right? Because all these institutions, regardless of what they are driven by how much money is being made. And right now, we getting into my closing statement. Okay. So I will contend that yes, capitalism has its advantages. And I will also contend that capitalism is not going anywhere. But we also got to understand the downside and the dark side to capitalism of why our society is the way it is. It's because we're willing to exploit. We're willing to step on other people to make sure we are good and our family are good. And then on the flip side, we have this cognitive dissonance where we talk about charity and we talk about how God loves everybody and this, that. So we're like a two-headed monster. And yes, it can really be sickening in my estimation. Because for most of us, we just a hamster on a wheel spinning. We one catastrophe from changing our life. And unfortunately, it's not going anywhere. Class is not going anywhere. We've been told or we've heard that there will be no more middle class, and I can understand the sentiments. They're the haves and the have-nots. We talk about a 1%, but we know when we talk about 10% control most of the wealth in the country compared to the 90, that's capitalism. And the reason why there is not a revolution, the reason why there is not an uproar is because too many people are just trying to live day in and day out and keep their sanity and raise their kids. And they're doing the best that they can. But if people were willing to fight for what they thought was morally right, things would change. Because the numbers are on the side of the workers. And I always say there's a reason why they want you to vote, but they won't tell you the fact that you have the right to protest. You have the right to band together and demand that change happen. Demand that there's more equity. All right, we're gonna leave today's episode where it is. On our next episode, we're gonna be celebrating the 50. I don't know why I'm so happy, but I am. Okay. Hopefully you took something from this episode, man. Um, I appreciate y'all for rocking with me, man. Um, Especially for those of you who've been around for most of our episodes, if not all of our episodes. I really appreciate you. Make sure you comment, like, subscribe. If you get any suggestions of topics you would like me to make the case on, please hit me up on my social media handles. Of course, the links will be in the description. Please pick up my latest book, The Relationship Guide, The Business and Science of Reason. You can get that at jacobisom.com, as well as my merch at levellifecreate.com. And if you would like to get a consultation, whether individual or couple, rcdconsultancy.com is where you can reach me at, and all those links will be in my description. As always, I'm you, you are me. Love always, love eternal. Remember, the worst thing you can do is lie to yourself, and I believe we have made that case, baby. Deuces. One love.